Hey everybody, this is Darren Van Dam, and you are watching Flick Connection, the show that helps you get more out of movies. And today I'm going to be telling you about 10 amazing movies on HBOmax that you have probably missed. So like all of my hidden gem list, this is going to be an eclectic mix. There's quite a range of genres on this list. It's going to be 10 movies. Most of them are going to be ones you've probably never seen or even heard of. Starting with my number 10 pick, all the way at the back, Pathfinder. Now, it's important to state that this is not a very well-reviewed movie. But if you're in the mood for a non-historically accurate movie about Vikings attacking Native Canadians, protected by none other than Karl Urban, then Pathfinder is definitely your movie. So the story with this is that it is actually a remake of another movie called Pathfinder, and it's very different, and that movie wasn't even technically Vikings, and then this one is, and the costumes, none of that is anywhere close to historically accurate. This falls in line more with sort of a fantasy movie, and Karl Urban plays a child left behind by the Vikings that was raised by the natives that now will defend the natives from the Vikings. That's it. That's the setup. And what you get are these really fantastic fantasy sequences and scenes that are really grim, but also really beautiful at the same time. Now, this movie was also cut down about 8 minutes from its original cut just to get an R rating. Because there was too much blood, there was a sex scene that was taken out, and some of those scenes did include some exposition that, now that they're gone, the movie doesn't quite make as much sense as it would have otherwise. Another reason for sort of the low rating. However, for sort of a B movie about a Native American killing a bunch of Vikings, this is a pretty cool flick. Now, imagine a street magician that uses his sleight of hand to defeat some neighborhood toughs. Except he's actually able to manipulate objects due to a Tony Stark-like improvised object embedded into his arm. If you imagine that correctly, you would be imagining the movie Sleight. This is a low-budget sci-fi movie from the same director who did Sweetheart, which I have recommended. That movie is on Netflix. And Sleight is maybe not quite as good, only because it feels a little bit unfinished. And the reason for that seems to be maybe budget issues, and also it's an early attempt at a feature film from an up-and-coming filmmaker. And while I think he nailed most of what you see, it does feel like there should have been another scene or two to not just stretch it out, but to enrich this world a little bit more. That said, that's my only real nitpick with the movie. It's a really cool flick with an interesting concept that does have some great sequences. Just keep in mind, it is this low-budget effort that was this director's sort of like intro into feature filmmaking. You can kind of tell a little bit, but when you keep that in mind, it's an impressive accomplishment. Now, the movie Paris, Texas is somewhat of a cult classic from the 80s, especially with sort of the art film crowd, and it opens with a man just wandering through the desert. He's played by Harry Dean Stanton, who you probably recognize from a ton of movies like Alien, and the crux of this movie, or at least for the first 30 to 40 minutes, is who is this guy? Where is he going? Why is he wandering through the desert? And then it takes you to a pretty surprising place. You're not going to really predict where it's going. And this is actually based on a play written by Sam Shepard, who wrote a ton of plays similar to this. This is one of the more famous movies adapted from his work, and it's really interesting. This is sort of a peaceful, calm movie where you're sort of understanding what's going on with this guy. It has held up over time. It is still really well respected today. If you consider yourself a film buff and not just a movie lover, I would consider this to be required viewing whether you end up liking it or not. But if you tend to like more action and more things going on, this is a pretty slow, quiet movie, but it's very, very good. Now, my next pick is Jim Jarmusch's. That is harder to say than you would think. Jim Jarmusch is hard enough, but Jarmusch's is tricky. But it's Jim Jarmusch's Dead Man, which I thought was one of his earlier movies. I don't know why I had it out of the timeline wrong. This is right in the middle of the pack when you look on IMDb, and I love this movie, but this is not for everybody. In this movie, Johnny Depp plays a man who takes a bullet pretty early on in the story, and then the rest of the movie is him sort of going on this journey as this bullet is getting closer and closer to actually killing him. Now, something to keep in mind with this movie, and this is the case with a lot of Jim Jarmusch's work. Yes, there is a plot and a story that goes through it, but the plot and story is fairly thin. It's mostly a delivery device for these little vignettes, these little scenes where he's interacting with different characters and people. People played by Crispin Glover, Iggy Pop, a bunch of interesting characters, and that's more of what you're watching now. As you can see, this is done in black and white, but Johnny Depp has a really great character. Some of the other characters that come in and out of the story are really interesting and kind of wild. That's what you're watching with this movie, not so much the overall plot. Certainly an art film, certainly not for everybody, but another one. If you consider yourself a film buff, this is one that you really need to have under your belt sometime soon. All right, now we're on number 6, and I will say that my top 5 are 5 movies that I love recommending to almost everybody and anybody. That said, my number 6 pick is far from being for everybody, but if you like my really weird, bizarre, and dark recommendations, which there are a lot on this channel, then Deerskin might be the movie for you. Now, this is from the same director as Rubber. If you've seen Rubber, this movie is just as bizarre. It's about a man who wishes to be the only person in the world to wear a jacket. It's that strange. Now, this one does take a very dark turn, and essentially, I don't want to explain the whole thing, but the way to watch this movie is the understanding that the jacket that he's wearing represents his ego. If you just grab that simple concept from the beginning, then all of the weirdness makes sense. If you don't tap into that early, then this is going to be the strangest, most bizarre thing that you've ever seen that makes absolutely no sense. So that is important, but when you do clue into that, it makes for a very interesting and thought-provoking watching experience. It's funny, but in an extremely dry way. And if you're not familiar with Rubber, it has a little bit in common with movies like The Killing of a Sacred Deer, or maybe even more so with The Lobster. If you like those movies, this is another one to check out that's in a similar vein. Now, my top 5, like I said, include some of the most favorite movies for me to recommend, especially as we get closer to the number 1 pick. But if Ryan Gosling has not won you over with movies like La La Land, Drive, Blade Runner, or hell, The Notebook, then Lars and the Real Girl might be the movie to finally win you over to him. In this movie, he plays a man who is suffering from a mental disorder, and he believes that this life-size sex doll is his girlfriend. So much so that he brings her to introduce her to family. It's a really funny concept, and it is delivered with more heart than anything else on this list. It's filled with a lot of genuine emotions, and it works really, really well, mainly because Ryan Gosling just delivers this character in such a unique way. It's a really interesting, not just character study, but it's a beautiful movie. It really is, and it's filled with funny moments. Like I said, the concept alone is funny enough, and so you get plenty of funny moments, but then it really does have a lot more going on under the skin with this one. This makes for a nice date night movie. Valentine's Day is coming up. This could be a great watch if you don't really like rom-coms or what would commonly be referred to as chick flicks. While this technically falls into that genre, it's enjoyable for everybody. This is not really one to watch with super small kids because it is about a giant sex doll, but it is pretty accessible to most audiences outside of that. Easily one of the most underrated movies of all time, starring one of the most underrated actors of all time, Paul Walker, is Running Scared. I'm serious about this one. It's great. He's great in it. If you passed on this movie because you felt like Paul Walker was only capable of this,
yeah, bro, man, he like them apples,
then I'm sorry to tell you, you have f***ed up. This is a totally badass movie with some wild direction. I mean, a ton of style. There's just crazy amounts of flair with this one, and it works because this is like kind of like an old school drive-in movie. It's gritty, it's dirty, it's entertaining as hell. It's got some heavy elements, some light elements. It's just this badass gangster flick about this guy trying to track down a gun while some other people are tracking him down, and his son gets wrapped up in it, and there's child abductors wrapped up in it, and there's a pimp that's a maniac wrapped up in it, and it just still manages to work. It's such a cool flick. I don't even care that there's something that gets revealed towards the end that kind of negates the whole story. It's still just an absolute joy to watch. I wish this director had gone on to do more movies similar to this one in some sort of way, and he didn't. He tried to do something serious after this, and his career just sort of like fizzled. This is still a cool flick. It holds up. I've watched it I don't know how many times. If you generally like my more like exciting, wild, badass, bloodbath type recommendations, do not sleep on this one. Watch it soon. Now, believe it or not, my next pick is called Sexy Beast, and the opening sequence for this movie stars Ray Winston sunbathing, listening to my absolute favorite track by the Stranglers.
Walking on the beaches, looking at the beaches.
As a boulder tumbles towards him. That's how this movie starts off, and it is one of the most underrated, underappreciated gangster movies of all time. Now, it's not completely unnoticed. Ben Kingsley actually got nominated for an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor when this movie came out. In this movie, Ben Kingsley plays a mob boss, a Don, who is an absolute maniac. He's trying to get Ray Winston's character to come back for a heist, and he does not want to, and Ben Kingsley does not take no for an answer. This is an intense movie. The middle portion of this movie features a lot of yelling, like a lot of screaming. This one too has an incredible style. This is from a director that I've loved for years, John Glazer. I love all of his, believe it or not, I've got a DVD full of his commercials and music videos. He also did Under the Skin with Scarlett Johansson. I like Sexy Beast better. I think it's a cool, slick gangster flick that does not do things that you would expect. In fact, it's one of my favorite movies. I love everything about this. It's easily in my top 50 movies of all time, and it's fairly unknown, making it one of my favorite hidden gems to recommend no matter what platform it's on. And with that glowing review, I've got 2 recommendations left that I think are better. My number 2 pick is the first movie from the Coen brothers. 2 guys who are in a small group of the most important directors of all time, and this is their first crack at making a feature film, and they killed it. The story behind this one is that they went to doctors and dentists and lawyers, people with disposable income, pitched their idea and raised about $1 million to shoot this feature, and they shot it right. It looks like it's done on a proper budget. It's a smaller story with not a lot of special effects and that kind of stuff, but just an absolute killer thriller of a movie. This falls right in line with No Country for Old Men and Fargo. And in fact, for years, I have considered Blood Simple, Fargo, and No Country for Old Men to be their trilogy, their dark sort of thriller trilogy. Now, I know they've done other movies in that genre, but these 3 fit together in a way that none of the others do. If you like either of the other 2, this is a must-watch for you. Another one, if you consider yourself a film buff, this is a must-watch for you. They show you how to create a thriller perfectly, how to build tension without a lot of stuff to work with. Like I said, not a lot of special effects, nothing crazy over the top. There's no science fiction, anything going on here. It's just a good, simple thriller that's expertly executed by people who had never made a feature film before, showing you they were destined to be filmmakers if this is their first crack at it, and that has proven to be true. If you love anything that they make sure you watch Blood Simple before it leaves HBOmax, because it does not tend to stay around on streaming platforms very long in my experience. Now, believe it or not, this is not hyperbole. This number 1 pick is quite possibly my favorite hidden gem movie to recommend to people of all time. My absolute favorite. And it is George Clooney's first time directing a movie. It stars Sam Rockwell, Julia Roberts, George Clooney, Drew Barrymore, and more. And that movie is called Confessions of a Dangerous Mind. Now, this was actually written by Charlie Kaufman, who's most famous for writing movies like Being John Malkovich, Adaptation, and he most recently directed I'm Thinking of Ending Things. This is his least weird script, and it's still pretty weird because it is based on the memoirs, the actual book of the life story of Chuck Barris, who was a famous TV producer. He's responsible for a lot of really famous game shows, like The Dating Show, The Gong Show, things like that. And his memoirs detailed his life as an international assassin. Now, nobody knows whether or not that's true, but Sam Rockwell plays him in this movie, and the movie supposes that it is true. So you get this really interesting period piece of this guy creating these game shows in the 60s that's nice and fun and all of that. And then you get this spy story that's happening with it at the same time. The style of this movie's great. The storytelling's amazing. Sam Rockwell's great. Everybody's great in this. Even Rutger Hauer appears on screen for a little bit. He's fantastic. George Clooney's next movie went on to get nominated for a bunch of Academy Awards. I think this one is much better, and I think it's by far the best movie he has ever made in terms of movies he's directed. I think it's Sam Rockwell's best performance. It's just an absolute gem of a movie because it's fun, it's funny, it's heavy. At times, it's got just this amazing balance of all these elements done in a way that's just incredibly entertaining and fun to watch, and it's not appreciated enough. If you like my recommendations, hell, even if you find that you only like half of my recommendations, this is one to watch. If you have an HBOmax account, the next time you're looking for something good to watch, this is the one to pick. If you've seen it enough times in your life though, let me know what else you're interested in watching on this list. Let's also thank the Patreon supporters. If you're interested in becoming a Patreon supporter, there is a link in the description. There's also a link where you can become a channel member and get access to exclusive videos, like the one I did just last week about the little things where I go into detail about the way that movie ends and explain what I liked and didn't like about it, full of spoilers. Stuff like that is available over there for you to watch as soon as you sign up, but I will keep making videos as long as you keep watching them. Thanks for watching this HBO episode, and you will see me on the next one.